Alaina Weinheimer is a postdoctoral research fellow at Bigelow Laboratory for Ocean Sciences. She moved to Maine this past January to start as a Simmons Foundation postdoctoral fellow. Welcome to Maine. And the Simmons Foundation is, again, all that. Just saying, like, to get this postdoc is pretty awesome. She's worked on a variety of projects to understand how viruses impact microbes in the ocean. She finished up her PhD at Virginia Tech in November, where she studied the evolution and biology of unusually large viruses called jumbo phages and giant viruses, which I think is going on my banned list. In her spare time, Alaina helps run a blog called The Microbial Times to share the good news and wonders of microbes to all. And her favorite pop culture science thing is the music video to This Life by Vampire Weekend. It's really pretty and showcases a lot of different microbes. But this is, I love this, that the last couple of speakers gave me multiple answers to this, so you're gonna hear an earful. But for learning about science, Alaina really enjoys the YouTube channel Kyrgyzstan in a nutshell. Kyrgyzstan? God, I'm just terrible at this pronunciation. All right, Alaina's talk is Microscopic Warfare in the Ocean and How It Affects You.
There you go. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. I don't know if I'll try the pointer, but I might end up just gesturing. We'll see how this, and then, okay, I don't know, is the laser button? Oh, there we go, okay. So, I know this is a really aggressive title, but I promise it has a happy ending. I work at Bigelow Lab for Ocean Sciences, and we study the ocean. And in every drop of water, there's about 1 million microbes. And we take this seawater and look at it, at the DNA of the organisms in this seawater. We see a bunch of blobs. And the big blobs are the bacteria. You can see there's a bunch of big blobs, but there's also a lot of tiny little blobs. And those are the DNA of viruses. Specifically, don't worry, these viruses don't infect you. They are phages, and they infect bacteria. And so these bacteria in the ocean are constantly surrounded by viruses that can infect them. And so they've developed a lot of different ways to defend themselves against these phages. But phages have also developed ways to defend themselves back. So my research kind of looks at this warfare, so to speak, and I'll just show an example of this warfare. When a phage infects a cell, it attaches to the cell, injects its DNA, and then makes new copies of itself before bursting the cell open and killing the bacteria. And so bacteria can defend themselves at different stages of this infection. And probably the most famous defense they use is the CRISPR-Cas system. I don't know if some of you have heard of this. It's used in gene editing technology, but it comes from bacteria. And bacteria use this system to recognize phage DNA that gets injected and then destroy that DNA immediately. But a way that a phage can counteract this defense is by, I'm sorry it's so small, but they can create a shell around their DNA so that those enzymes and proteins can't get to their DNA. So these kind of interactions are happening all the time in the ocean. You might be wondering, what does this battle between microbes that don't infect me have to do with me? And I'm here to say that microbes are important in our lives in a lot of different ways. In the ocean specifically, the photosynthetic bacteria or microbes or algae photosynthesize and produce oxygen, and about half of the oxygen we breathe comes from algal microbes in the ocean. But they're also forming the bottom of the food chain. So small animals eat these bacteria that get eaten by larger bacteria, and so on. But phages infect these microbes, and so they can prevent these microbial nutrients from moving up the food chain. So that's one way that if these bacteria have a lot of defense, we're not sure about how often these bacteria get infected or how successful those phage infections are. And so understanding the defenses of the bacteria against the phages and the defenses of the phage against the bacteria can help us understand how much virus infections are actually impacting the movement of nutrients in the food web. But more relevant probably to medical applications is their role in their potential use in human health. A lot of bacteria are becoming resistant to antibiotics. For example, some bacteria that cause staph infections are resistant to the antibiotics that we use. However, we can start using phages to kill these bacteria instead. And instead of wiping out your whole gut or wherever is infected with the that you use the antibiotic, you can just target the bacteria that's infecting you. So this is one use of phages, but this treatment won't work if if the bacteria has defenses against this phage. However, we can find phages that have counter defenses against the bacteria's defense. And so we're only starting to understand also what defenses bacteria have. In fact, over half of the defense systems that we know today were discovered in just the last 5 years. So my research kind of looks at what bacteria often have in their genomes, or what they use, and what do phages use to see and try to understand which are the most successful defense systems. And I look at the ocean because there's lots of bacteria and lots of different phages in there. There's a lot of diversity, and it's relatively easy to study, and it is useful for understanding the food web in the ocean. And that is all I have. Talk really fast.
Hi. Coming off of, a pandemic, I'm a little leery of taking a, virus pill. And can you talk a little bit about mutation and why it's, I guess maybe not an issue here, or if it is an issue here?
Yeah, so phages and viruses that infect bacteria, or at least most of the ones that we know about and are using, have these tails on the bottom, and they're really specific to bacteria, even specific beyond species level to strain level. So it's not likely, it's hard to get a phage to actually infect the bacteria, let alone we have a very different cell type from bacteria. The outside of our cells look so different from bacteria cells that it's very unlikely that a phage would eventually mutate into a tail that can infect us. It's not impossible, but that for the amount of mutations you would need to get that far, the phage lineage would die off before that could happen, if that makes sense. But yes, it is something scary to think about, for sure. But it's, yeah.
I don't know how many humaners we have here, but at UMaine, there is a phage class that uses microbes from the soil. Why did you choose to study the ocean? Is there a greater scope to your research?
Yeah, soil virology and soil viruses is like a really booming new area relative to studying viruses in the ocean. So it's a new frontier, partly because soil is messy, and it's hard to get rid of the soil particles and just get the phage particles, whereas ocean water you can just filter through and get something. So it's a little trickier to study in soil. They're starting to get better methods to do this. So there's hope that, I would love to study soil too, and I'm very curious because it's also a different environment. In the ocean, things are like flowing around and can actually come into contact with each other easier. But in the soil, unless there's a rainstorm or something, it's harder to get into contact between the virus and the bacteria. So it's a very different dynamic, but also very interesting.
So in the Western world, we use actually a lot of antibiotics to treat like for example, in Russia, bacteriophages are well known and used for quite some time to treat, for example, diseases with E. coli in the gut. Now, is your science kind of focused on the drug target or in general drug development, or you just focus on the scientific aspect and find other mechanisms? That's my first question. The second, is do you actually can cultivate this stuff, or you just use samples from nature?
Yeah, so I want to make sure I'm understanding the question correctly. For the first part, you're wondering if this could lead to drug development, this research. In terms of like ingesting a phage or like getting a capsule of phages, there's been some development in the Western or Western European and American research, but so phages were discovered about 100 years ago in like the 1920s, and they were starting to become popular as tools to kill diseases. But then antibiotics got discovered in like the 1950s, and those just became so popular, at least among American and European research, that it exploded, and phages kind of got forgotten. And they're a lot harder to engineer and play with than chemicals that kill everything. So it's lagged behind a lot, but it's still ongoing in other places, and it's starting to pick up again in America and Europe because of all the resistance that's happening. So that's part of why phage therapy it's slow to start, but it's becoming more of a thing, and I hope you all support phage therapy because I think it's a really promising alternative. And then the other part of your question, why, sorry? So I'm looking at the DNA because, and just what genes they have, and determining what defenses they have based on their genes, because most of the bacteria in the ocean, about 99% almost, can't grow in the lab. They have special nutrient requirements, and they probably have to grow with other bacteria that we can't get them to grow in the lab. So unfortunately, I haven't been able to test a phage with the bacteria that has the defense and see how it's actually operating. There are a few of the more algal microbes that we have in the lab that we can test some of these things with, but so far all we can say is we see that they have these genes, so they're probably doing it. I'm sorry.
That was great. Thank you.